I was standing in my backyard, watching the dragonflies skim across the water, when I heard the sharp rap on my front door that would change everything. The pond had been there longer than any house on this street, longer than the street itself, but apparently that did not matter to the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. My name is Franklin Anders, and I had inherited this property from my grandfather 8 months ago. The house sat on 2 acres in what used to be the outskirts of Charlotte, North Carolina, though the city had sprawled out to meet us decades ago. When developers built Willow Creek Estates in the late 90s, they wrapped their cookie-cutter subdivision around my family's original land like water flowing around a stone. We were grandfathered in, or so I thought. I walked to the front door and opened it to find a woman in her mid-50s with blonde highlights and a clipboard held against her chest like a shield. She wore a cream-colored blazer despite the August heat, and her lips were pressed into a line so tight they had gone pale. "Franklin Anders?" she asked, though she clearly knew who I was. "That's me." "I'm Patricia Holloway, president of the Willow Creek Estates HOA board. We need to discuss the illegal water feature on your property." I blinked at her. "The what now?" "The pond," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You've constructed an unpermitted pond that violates our community guidelines. Section 12, subsection 4 clearly states that all water features must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee before installation." "I didn't install anything," I said. "That pond has been there since before I was born." Patricia's expression suggested she thought I was lying. "According to our records, there was no pond disclosed when the surrounding properties were developed. You'll need to drain it and fill it in within 30 days, or we'll be forced to take legal action." "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious, Mr. Anders. We've already filed a formal complaint with the county. You'll be receiving official documentation within the week." She pulled a tri-folded notice from her clipboard and thrust it toward me. "This is your courtesy warning." I took the paper, too stunned to argue effectively. "This pond has been here since my great-grandfather dug it in 1912. It's on the original property plat." "Then you'll have no trouble proving that in court," Patricia said with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. She turned on her heel and walked back to her white Lexus SUV parked in my driveway. I stood there watching her drive away, the notice crumpling slightly in my grip. The pond was maybe 40 feet across at its widest point, spring-fed and deep enough that my grandfather used to stock it with bluegill every summer. Ancient willows draped over the edges, their roots probably holding half the bank together. The idea of destroying it felt like being asked to tear down a piece of family history. Back inside, I smoothed out the notice on my kitchen table and read through it properly. The language was dense and threatening, full of legal terminology about covenants and restrictions. At the bottom was Patricia's signature, along with 2 other board members I had never met. 30 days to comply or face fines starting at $500 per day, with the possibility of a lien against my property. I called my sister Diane, who lived in Raleigh and worked as a paralegal. "They can't do that, can they?" I asked after explaining the situation. "Depends on the HOA's governing documents," she said. "Did Grandpa ever sign anything when they built the subdivision?" "I have no idea. I'm going through his papers now, but there's boxes of stuff." "Well, you better find out fast. HOAs have way more power than most people realize. If your property is technically part of their jurisdiction and you sign the covenants, they might actually have a case. The pond predates their entire neighborhood by 80 years. Doesn't matter if you agreed to their terms when you inherited. Did you close with a title company?" I thought back to the inheritance process. "Yeah, standard title and trust downtown. Call them, get copies of everything. And Franklin, don't ignore this. These HOA types thrive on making examples of people." After hanging up, I spent the rest of the evening digging through the boxes I had shoved into the spare bedroom. My grandfather had been a meticulous record keeper, thank God. I found property tax statements going back to the 60s, the original deed from when his father bought the land in 1908, even receipts for fence posts from 1943. But what I really needed was buried at the bottom of the 3rd box, a leather portfolio containing the original surveyor's Plat map from 1912, drawn up when my great-grandfather, Theodore Anders, had first developed the property for farming. The map was drawn in faded ink on heavy paper, but the details were clear. The pond was marked right there, labeled Spring Pond, approximately 8 feet depth. There were measurements, property lines, even a note about water rights from Dutchman's Creek that fed the spring. I laid it carefully on the table and took photos with my phone. This was my evidence. This was how I would shut down Patricia Holloway and her overzealous board. The next morning, I drove to the county registrar's office to get certified copies of the original plat filing. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Sheila, helped me navigate the record system. 1912, she said, raising her eyebrows. That's going to be in the vault. Give me about 20 minutes. She disappeared into a back room and returned with a large format book bound in green cloth. Here we go. Anders property, registered April 1912. She opened it carefully, and there was my great-grandfather's plat map, identical to the one I had at home. Can I get certified copies? Sure thing. $15 per page. I paid for 3 copies and left feeling vindicated. Let Patricia try to argue with documentation that was over a century old. That afternoon, I drafted an email to the HOA board, attaching photos of the plat map and explaining in careful detail that the pond was not only legal, but had been documented with the county long before Willow Creek Estates existed. I kept my tone professional, even though what I really wanted to do was tell Patricia where she could shove her clipboard. Her response came within an hour. Mr. Anders, the age of the pond is irrelevant. When Willow Creek Estates was incorporated, all properties within the boundaries became subject to our covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Your property was included in the plat map filed with the county in 1998. As a property owner within our community, you are bound by our rules. The pond must go. I read the email 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each pass. I pulled up the subdivision plat from '98 that I had gotten from the title company. Sure enough, the surveyor had drawn the boundaries of Willow Creek Estates, with my property sitting right in the middle like an island. But there was a note in small print along my property line. Anders property, not subject to HOA, covenants per exclusion agreement dated April 15, 1998. I nearly shouted in triumph. There it was. My grandfather had negotiated an exclusion when the developers came calling. He had made sure our property rights were protected. I fired off another email with a photo of that section of the plat, highlighting the exclusion clause. As you can see, my property is explicitly excluded from HOA governance. The pond stays. This time, the response took until the next day. It came not from Patricia, but from a lawyer named Gregory Chen at a firm called Morrison & Associates. Dear Mr. Anders, we represent the Willow Creek Estates HOA. While we acknowledge the exclusion agreement from 1998, our client contends that said agreement was superseded by updated covenants filed in 2004, which removed the exclusion clause. Please cease all hostile communications with board members and direct future correspondence to this office. I sat back in my chair, feeling the first real tendrils of worry creep in. They had a lawyer, and they were claiming the exclusion had been removed. But how could they remove protection my grandfather had negotiated without his consent? I called Diane again. They can't just unilaterally change an agreement, she said. Did Grandpa sign anything in 2004? I don't know. I'll have to check. Do that, because if he didn't agree to the change, it's not binding. You might need to get your own lawyer, Franklin. I was afraid you'd say that. I spent that evening and the next day going through every piece of paper I could find from 2004. Nothing. No new agreements, no signatures, no correspondence with the HOA. My grandfather had been sharp as a tack until he died at 91 last year. If someone had tried to take away his property rights, he would have fought it. I found a real estate attorney named Marcus Webb who agreed to a consultation. His office was in one of the new high-rises uptown, all glass and steel and uncomfortable modern furniture. Marcus was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with graying temples and the confident air of someone who won more cases than he lost. I laid out the whole situation, showing him both plat maps and the lawyer's letter. This is pretty straightforward, he said after reviewing everything. They can't remove an exclusion without the property owner's consent. That's basic contract law. The original agreement protected your grandfather's property from HOA governance, and without his signature changing that, it's still in effect. So the pond is safe? The pond is definitely safe. But here's what's going to happen. They'll probably sue you anyway, hoping you'll cave rather than fight. HOAs do this all the time. They count on homeowners not having the resources or the will to defend themselves. How much is this going to cost me? If we can resolve it quickly with a strongly worded letter and maybe a motion to dismiss, a few thousand. If it goes to trial, significantly more. But honestly, I don't think it will get that far. Their own lawyer has to know they don't have a case. I hired Marcus on the spot. He drafted a letter to Morrison and Associates laying out our position and demanding they cease harassment of his client. He sent it certified mail and copied me on the email version. For a week, there was blissful silence. I started to think maybe that was the end of it. Marcus had scared them off with the threat of a countersuit for harassment. Then I came home from work one afternoon to find a bright orange notice stapled to my front door. Notice of code violation, in bold letters across the top. The county had cited me for maintaining a mosquito breeding ground and environmental hazard. The complaint had been filed by concerned citizens, but I knew exactly who was behind it. I called Marcus immediately. "They're going around us," he said, anger clear in his voice. "Can't win on HOA grounds, so they're trying to get the county to do their dirty work. Do you have mosquito problems?" "No more than anyone else with standing water. I've got fish in there that eat the larvae. It's a balanced ecosystem. Get an environmental assessment done. I know a guy who does wetland surveys. He can document that the pond isn't a health hazard." The environmental consultant, Dr. Raymond Price, came out 2 days later. He was in his 60s, wearing waders and carrying testing equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. He spent 3 hours taking water samples, measuring pH levels, cataloging plant and animal species. This is a healthy spring-fed pond," he told me, making notes on a tablet. "Excellent water quality, diverse aquatic life, no signs of contamination or excessive algae. The fish population is keeping mosquito larvae in check. You've got dragonfly nymphs, water striders, even a couple of painted turtles. This is actually a valuable microhabitat. Can you put that in a report?" "Already am. I'll have it to you by tomorrow." Dr. Price's report was 15 pages of scientific documentation proving my pond was not only harmless, but environmentally beneficial. Marcus submitted it to the county along with a formal objection to the violation notice. The county rescinded the citation within a week. Small victory, but it felt good. Then things got weird. I woke up one Saturday morning to the sound of machinery, heavy machinery. I threw on jeans and a shirt and rushed outside to find a dump truck backing into my driveway, followed by an excavator on a flatbed trailer. "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" I ran toward the truck, waving my arms. "What are you doing?" The driver, a heavy-set guy with a beard, leaned out his window. "Got a work order for pond removal at this address." "From who?" He checked his clipboard. Willow Creek Estates HOA. They hired us to drain and fill the pond, said the homeowner was non-compliant." "I'm the homeowner and nobody's touching that pond. Who hired you specifically?" "Lady named Patricia something. Holloway, maybe?" "Let me see that work order." He handed it down. Sure enough, Patricia's signature authorizing the work, with my address and a property description. But I had never agreed to this. This was trespassing at minimum, possibly destruction of property. "This is fraudulent," I said, my hands shaking with adrenaline. "I never authorized this work. If you start digging, I'll have you arrested." The driver looked uncomfortable. "Look, man, I just go where I'm told. But if you're saying this isn't legit, I'm not getting in the middle of it. Let me call my boss." He got on his phone while I called Marcus. It went to voicemail because, of course, it was Saturday morning. I left a frantic message explaining what was happening. The truck driver finished his call and climbed down from the cab. "My boss says we're pulling out. We need written authorization from the actual property owner before we proceed. Sorry for the confusion." I watched them turn around and leave, my heart still racing. Patricia had actually tried to have my pond destroyed while I wasn't home. The audacity was breathtaking. I called the non-emergency police line and filed a report about the attempted unauthorized work. The dispatcher said an officer would come by to take a statement. Officer Davis showed up an hour later, a younger guy who took detailed notes about the whole incident. "This is more of a civil matter," he said, "but the fact that they misrepresented themselves to the contractors could be fraud. You should definitely pursue this with your lawyer." Marcus called me back that afternoon, and when I told him what happened, he was silent for a long moment. "They tried to destroy your property," he finally said. "That's beyond harassment. That's actionable. We're filing for a restraining order and possibly pressing charges. Can we do that?" "We absolutely can. This crossed a line. I'll have the paperwork ready by Monday morning." That evening, I sat on my back porch watching the sunset reflect off the pond's surface. The willows swayed in the breeze, and somewhere in the cattails, a bullfrog started its deep rumbling call. This place was worth fighting for. Monday morning, Marcus filed for a temporary restraining order against Patricia Holloway and the Willow Creek Estates HOA, prohibiting them from entering my property or taking any action regarding the pond. He also filed a lawsuit for harassment, trespassing, and attempted destruction of property, seeking damages and attorney's fees. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for Wednesday afternoon. I took off work and met Marcus at the courthouse. Patricia showed up with Gregory Chen, her lawyer. She looked furious but said nothing to me. We all filed into the courtroom and waited for the judge. Judge Marilyn Foster was a stern-looking woman in her 60s who clearly had no patience for nonsense. She reviewed the filings and looked over her glasses at both parties. "Mr. Chen, your client hired contractors to remove a pond from Mr. Anders' property without his permission?" "Your Honor, the HOA believed they had the authority to remediate what they considered a code violation." "Did Mr. Anders authorize this work?" "No, Your Honor, but the HOA's position is that his property falls under their jurisdiction. And yet Mr. Webb has provided documentation showing an explicit exclusion from HOA governance dating back to 1998, which was never legally modified. Is that correct?" Chen shifted uncomfortably. "We contend that subsequent filings superseded the original exclusion. Do you have documentation showing Mr. Anders or his grandfather consented to this change?" "Not at this time, Your Honor." Judge Foster looked unimpressed. "So you attempted to destroy a century-old pond on someone else's property based on authority you cannot demonstrate you actually possess. Does that about sum it up?" "We believed we were acting within our rights." "Belief is not the same as legal authority, Mr. Chen. The restraining order is granted. Ms. Holloway, you and your HOA are prohibited from entering Mr. Anders' property, contacting him directly, or taking any action related to the pond pending resolution of the underlying lawsuit. Violation will result in contempt charges. Are we clear?" Patricia's face had gone red, but she nodded. Outside the courthouse, Marcus was practically glowing. "That could not have gone better. Foster's no nonsense, and she clearly thinks they're in the wrong. What happens now?" "Now we proceed with the lawsuit. I'm betting they'll try to settle rather than go to trial. No judge is going to side with them on this." I went home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The restraining order meant Patricia couldn't harass me anymore. The pond was safe, at least for now, but Patricia Holloway was not the type to give up easily. 2 weeks later, I received a notice that the Willow Creek Estates HOA had called a special meeting to vote on a special assessment against my property to cover their legal fees. According to the notice, they were charging me $15,000. I immediately forwarded it to Marcus. "They can't assess you if you're not actually part of the HOA," he said. "This is more harassment. We'll add it to the lawsuit." The special meeting was open to all residents, so I decided to attend. I wanted to see what kind of support Patricia actually had. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, a building at the center of the subdivision that also housed a small gym and a pool. About 40 people showed up, mostly older residents who looked like they had nothing better to do on a Thursday evening. Patricia called the meeting to order and immediately launched into a speech about property values and community standards. She painted me as a rogue homeowner who refused to follow the rules, threatening everyone's investments. "The Anders property has become a liability," she said, pacing in front of the assembled residents. "The pond attracts wildlife that damages our lawns and gardens. It's a breeding ground for mosquitoes, and Mr. Anders has shown complete disregard for our community guidelines." A hand went up in the back. An elderly man I didn't recognize stood up. "Patricia, Didn't the Anders family own that property long before this subdivision existed? That's irrelevant to current regulations. Seems pretty relevant to me, the man said. My wife and I bought here in '99, and we were told the Anders property was grandfathered in. We used to walk by that pond all the time. It's beautiful. Why are we trying to destroy it? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. A woman in her 50s stood up. I have to agree with Harold. This seems like overreach. Has anyone actually been harmed by the pond? Patricia's expression tightened. This isn't about harm. It's about maintaining standards. What standards? Another voice called out. The man's pond is older than any of our houses. I watched the meeting devolve into argument, residents taking sides. To my surprise, more people seemed to be questioning Patricia's crusade than supporting it. Several mentioned that they had enjoyed the pond as a neighborhood feature, that their kids liked to look for turtles, that it added character to an otherwise bland subdivision. Finally, Harold stood up again. I move that we table this special assessment and reconsider the entire action against Mr. Anders. This has already cost us too much in legal fees, and it doesn't seem like we have any legal ground to stand on. I second that, someone else said. Patricia tried to shut down the motion, but the room was slipping away from her. A vote was called, and the motion passed 28-12. The special assessment was tabled indefinitely, and the board was directed to seek a resolution that didn't involve litigation. I left the meeting in a daze. I'd gone expecting a hostile crowd, and instead found allies I didn't know I had. The next morning, I received an email from a board member named Donald Price, one of the names I had seen on the original complaint notice. B. Mr. Anders, I want to apologize for the way this situation has been handled. Several of us on the board were not fully informed about the details before Patricia pushed through the initial complaint. After last night's meeting and reviewing the documentation you've provided, I believe we should drop this matter entirely. I'm calling for a board vote next week to withdraw the lawsuit and issue a formal apology. I hope you'll accept. I forwarded the email to Marcus. Is this real, or is it a trick? Could be either, he said. Let's wait and see if they actually follow through. The following Tuesday, I received a certified letter from Morrison and Associates. The HOA was withdrawing their counterclaims and requesting the court dismiss the matter with prejudice, meaning they couldn't refile. They included a formal letter of apology signed by 4 of the 5 board members. Patricia's signature was notably absent. We won, Marcus said when I called him. Completely. They're covering your attorney fees, too. What about Patricia? What about her? Does she face any consequences for trying to destroy my property? Marcus was quiet for a moment. That's trickier. The attempted pond removal was done under the HOA's name, and the HOA has corporate liability protection. Going after her personally would mean proving she acted outside her authority as board president, which is a high bar. So she gets away with it? Not entirely. I heard through the grapevine that there's a recall petition circulating. A lot of residents are unhappy with how she's handled this. She might lose her position. That felt like cold comfort, but I accepted it. The pond was safe. That was what mattered. The lawsuit was dismissed 2 weeks later. I received a check from the HOA for $8,000 covering my attorney fees and some additional compensation for the harassment. Marcus had actually billed less than that, so I ended up slightly ahead. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 3 months later, on a cold November morning, I found Patricia Holloway sitting in her car at the end of my driveway, just sitting there, staring at my house. I knocked on her window. She rolled it down, and I could see she'd been crying. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I just wanted to see it," she said. "The pond that destroyed everything." "You destroyed everything by being unreasonable. I was trying to protect our property values. Do you know what happens when one property doesn't follow the rules? Everything falls apart. Chaos. My property was never subject to your rules. You knew that and tried to bully me anyway." She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "They voted me out. After 23 years on the board, they voted me out because of you. They voted you out because you abused your power. That pond is dangerous. Someone's going to drown, and it will be your fault. It's 8 feet deep with clearly marked private property signs. Nobody's drowning." She started her car without another word and drove away. I watched her go, feeling more pity than anger. She had been so convinced she was right that she couldn't see reason, and it had cost her. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Patricia and her husband sold their house in Willow Creek Estates and moved to a condo in Ballantyne. The new HOA board president, Harold, who had spoken up at the meeting, sent me a fruit basket as a welcome to the neighborhood gesture, even though I had lived there for months. The note said the HOA would respect my property rights and hoped we could all be good neighbors going forward. Things settled into a peaceful routine after that. Winter came, and the pond developed a thin skin of ice during the coldest nights. I started walking around it every morning with my coffee, watching the seasons change reflected in the water. In February, I got a call from a reporter at the Charlotte Observer. Someone had tipped her off about the HOA dispute, and she wanted to do a story about property rights and HOA overreach. "It's becoming a bigger issue," she said. "HOAs foreclosing on people over unpaid fines, taking away property rights that existed before the HOAs were even formed. Your story is a good example of someone who fought back and won." I agreed to the interview. The story ran 2 weeks later on the front page of the local section. "Century-old pond survives HOA challenge." It included photos of the pond, quotes from me and Marcus, and a sidebar about North Carolina property law and HOA limitations. The article generated more attention than I expected. I got emails from other people fighting their HOAs over various issues, asking for advice. I directed them all to Marcus, who told me he picked up 3 new clients directly from the publicity. "You did good," he said, "not just for yourself, but for a lot of people who didn't know they could fight back." Spring arrived and the pond came alive with activity. Frogs returned to the cattails, their songs filling the evening air. Red-winged blackbirds built nests in the reeds. I stocked the pond with bluegill for the first time since my grandfather died, continuing the tradition. One Saturday in April, I was planting native flowers along the bank when Harold walked up with his wife, a pleasant woman named Margaret. "Hope you don't mind," Harold said. "We used to walk past here before all the trouble started. It's such a beautiful spot." "I don't mind at all," I said. "Actually, I've been thinking about putting in a proper path around it, maybe a bench or two, make it easier to enjoy." "That would be wonderful. We have a grandson who loves nature. He'd be thrilled to have a place to watch for turtles. Bring him by any time, just knock first." Over the next few weeks, I built a gravel path around the pond and installed 2 wooden benches I made from lumber my grandfather had stored in the barn. Harold and Margaret became regular visitors, always respectful, always appreciative. Other neighbors started stopping by too, asking if they could walk around, take photos, bring their kids to see the wildlife. I said yes to all of them. The pond had always been meant to be enjoyed, and sharing it felt right. In June, I got an unexpected letter from the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. Dr. Price, the environmental consultant who had assessed the pond during the dispute, had nominated it as a protected wetland habitat. The designation wouldn't change anything about how I used the property, but it would provide additional legal protection against future development or destruction. I framed the certificate they sent and hung it in my living room, right next to the original 1812 Plat map. One evening in July, almost exactly a year after Patricia had first knocked on my door, I was sitting on one of the benches watching fireflies emerge over the water when my phone rang. It was Diane. "Hey, I'm going to be in Charlotte next weekend for a conference. Can I come see this famous pond I've heard so much about?" "Of course. Stay the weekend. We'll grill out." She arrived on Friday afternoon, and I gave her the full tour. She stood at the edge of the pond, taking in the willows, the cattails, the dragonflies zipping over the surface. "I can't believe someone tried to destroy this," she said. "People get weird about control. Patricia couldn't handle that there was one property in her perfect little subdivision that she didn't have power over." "Well, I'm glad you fought. Grandpa would have been proud." We grilled steaks that night and ate on the back porch as the sun set. The pond reflected the orange and pink sky, and bullfrogs started their evening chorus. "You going to stay here?" Diane asked. "Or was this just about the inheritance?" "I'm staying," I said without hesitation. "This is home now. I didn't realize how much I needed a place like this until I had to fight for it." "What about work? You're still driving into the city every day." Actually, I've been talking to my boss about going remote a few days a week. The pandemic proved we can do it, and honestly, I'd rather spend more time here than in traffic. Diane smiled. You sound happy. I am happy. For the first time in a long time. The lawsuit officially closed in August when the final paperwork was filed. Marcus sent me copies of everything for my records, along with a note saying it had been one of the most satisfying cases of his career. In September, the new HOA board invited me to their annual meeting as a guest. Harold wanted to present me with a Community Appreciation Award for maintaining the pond as a neighborhood amenity. I almost declined, but Marcus convinced me to go. It's a goodwill gesture, and it officially ends the hostility. The meeting was nothing like the special session I had attended the year before. The atmosphere was relaxed, almost friendly. Harold gave a short speech about community cooperation and respecting property rights, then called me up to receive a plaque. Franklin Anders has shown us that being good neighbors means respecting each other's history and heritage, Harold said. The pond on his property has been a source of beauty and wildlife habitat for over a century, and we're grateful he's chosen to share it with our community. The room applauded. I shook hands with the board members and thanked them, feeling genuinely moved by the gesture. Afterward, several residents came up to thank me personally, sharing memories of walking past the pond, bringing their grandchildren to look for turtles, or just enjoying the view. One woman told me she had been photographing the pond through all 4 seasons and was putting together a coffee table book of local natural areas. Would you mind if I included it? She asked. I'd be honored. As I drove home that night, I thought about how dramatically things had changed in just over a year. I'd gone from being harassed and threatened to being welcomed and appreciated. The pond that Patricia had called an illegal build was now recognized as a valuable community asset. The Plat map from 1912, that yellowed piece of paper with its careful surveyor's notations, had been the key to everything. It proved not just that the pond was legal, but that some things are worth preserving, worth fighting for, worth defending against people who value uniformity over history. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the house my great-grandfather had built, the land my family had stewarded for generations. The pond gleamed in the moonlight, eternal and peaceful. Patricia had seen it as a threat to her vision of suburban perfection. I saw it as a connection to the past, a reminder that we're all temporary custodians of the land we occupy. The pond had been here long before me, and if I did my job right, it would be here long after. The following spring, I got a call from a local conservation group asking if I would be willing to place the pond under a conservation easement. The designation would prevent future owners from ever developing or destroying it, while still allowing the property to be sold and used. It's a way to protect places like this in perpetuity, the representative explained. We've identified your pond as having significant ecological and historical value. I thought about it for a few days, walking around the pond, watching the herons fish in the shallows and the turtles sun themselves on the fallen logs. Then I called them back and said yes. The paperwork took months to process, but by summer, everything was finalized. The pond was now protected forever, regardless of who owned the property. I had done what my grandfather and great-grandfather would have wanted. In August, exactly 2 years after Patricia's first visit, I threw a pond party. I invited the neighbors, Marcus, Dr. Price, Harold, and Margaret, even the reporter from the Observer. We set up tables on the lawn, grilled burgers and hot dogs, and let kids run around catching fireflies as evening fell. Harold raised a glass of sweet tea and proposed a toast. To Franklin, for teaching us all that doing the right thing is worth the fight. Everyone cheered. I looked around at the faces of my neighbors, people who had gone from strangers to friends because of a shared appreciation for a simple pond. This was what community was supposed to be, not rigid rules and uniformity, but mutual respect and shared values. As the party wound down and the last guests trickled home, I sat alone on one of the benches, listening to the bullfrogs and watching the stars reflect on the water. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane. Looked like a great party, proud of you, little brother. I smiled and put the phone away. The pond rippled gently in the night breeze, the same water that had sustained my family's land for over a century. Patricia had tried to erase it with bureaucratic power and baseless threats. But the truth had prevailed. The Plat map from 1912 had been more than just evidence in a legal dispute. It had been proof that history matters, that roots run deep, and that not everything can or should be homogenized for the sake of someone's idea of order. The conservation easement meant this place would outlast all of us, a small pocket of wildness in an increasingly developed world. Future generations would watch dragonflies skim across this water, listen to these frogs, see these willows sway in the wind, and they would never know how close it came to being destroyed by a woman with a clipboard and an inflated sense of authority. I walked back to the house, leaving the pond to its nighttime rhythms. Tomorrow I would return to my routine, working from home most days, taking coffee breaks by the water, watching the seasons turn. It was a good life, one I had almost lost, one I would never take for granted again. The light was on in my study, and through the window I could see the framed Plat map hanging on the wall. That fragile document had been my shield and my sword, proof that sometimes the past protects the future. My great-grandfather could never have imagined, when he hired that surveyor in 1912, that his careful record-keeping would save his pond a century later. But here we were, connected across time by ink on paper and a shared love for this land. I locked the door and turned off the lights, leaving just the porch light on for any late-night wanderers. The pond was safe. The fight was over. Justice, delayed but not denied, had been served. And somewhere out there in the night, the water continued its endless cycle, spring to pond, to creek, to river, to ocean, and back again, just as it had for 114 years, just as it would for centuries to come.